Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Aubrey Shaw, and I am a research consultant in the Center for Ethics at the University of Idaho, which is located in Moscow, Idaho, in the United States of America. Today, we are going to talk about the inclusion of students with physical disabilities while teaching and learning physical education. First, we're going to start off with some background. James Carlton wrote a book, Nothing About Us Without Us, in 2000. And he basically discussed how policies and programs for individuals with disabilities should not exist without input and participation of the population. I happen to agree with James Carlton because I am a person within this population. So I have traumatic brain injury, and which has left me with a physical disability. And within schools, few, if any, teacher preparation programs actively recruit individuals with physical disabilities to teach. Furthermore, if Carlton is correct, then it would be logical to prepare the population to be role models, educators, and even coaches. Because we want our students, able-bodied and people with physical disabilities, to be physically literate. And this is how we do it. Furthermore, school programs throughout the Western world need better inclusive policies and programs for people with physical disabilities in physical education, recreation, and sport. So let's discuss this more in depth. Most future able-bodied physical educators had a positive early experience in school sport or recreation or physical education. And you might say, oh yeah, that was me. And that is awesome. But what about the experience of students with physical disabilities? Now, I was lucky because I actually had that. My parents placed me in everything: dance, soccer, basketball. And so from a little girl, I had that experience of participating in school sport. But not every student gets that. Now, when we look at our present practices are limiting because they are limiting to students with physical disabilities, and then they are limiting to students who are able-bodied. Because able-bodied physical educators are inhibited by their education, their resources, and even their attitudes. Now, I have a question for you all. What would happen if we revisited our own perspectives about inclusion of the population in our policies and programs for teacher education? So the purpose of this presentation is threefold. One, we're going to discuss pre-service teacher preparation for engaging students with physical disabilities in physical education. Second, we're going to examine the importance of role models, environment, and education in creating a positive experience for students with physical disabilities and able-bodied students as well in physical education. And then three, we're going to provide solutions on how to include students with physical disabilities in the physical education classroom. So first, we will talk about the pre-service teacher preparation. Now, please be aware that this preparation is in the United States. And so we are limiting our experiences in the United States because I live there. And so when we look at pre-service teachers in most states, they only have one class of inclusion for students with physical disabilities in physical education, recreation, and sport. Now, some states, they do have endorsements for adaptive physical education, like the state of Minnesota. And they have you, as a teacher, you can take 15 extra credits and then get that endorsement. But that is not the norm. That is the exception. Most of the states only offer one class. In addition, the one class discusses two different topics. And the first topic is different types of disabilities. So spina bifida, cerebral palsy, traumatic brain injury, Down syndrome. And then the second part of the class is usually the legal aspects of inclusion. We have to include because the law makes us. In the United States, there are 3 different laws that people with physical disabilities are under. And when we look at inclusion, a lot of what happens is that in the United States, we are a legalistic society, which means that we follow laws. And we, unfortunately, in inclusion, when we look at those laws, we try to find loopholes to get around those laws. So it's not a humanistic approach, it's a legalistic approach, but then they don't include. And so this is a huge issue when we look at what is happening in the United States. Furthermore, in the United States, students have to teach. They have to get that hands-on experience before they get licensed. And so we call that student teaching. And in student teaching, they might or they might not get exposure to students with physical disabilities because it depends on their placement. It depends on the population in the school. And so they hopefully can get hands-on experience, but sometimes that does not happen. And what happens is that their experience is then limited because they haven't worked with students with physical disabilities. And so what happens is when they become teachers, they might have a student with a physical disability and they don't know what to do with them because they've never had that experience. Next, role models, environment, and education. Now, role models, environment, and education is very important to brain growth. And these 3 aspects are discussed in character development, moral reasoning and moral development, and brain growth, because these 3 aspects help the brain grow. Now, when we look at the importance of role models, students will pick their own role models, whether they are good or not, which is kind of stressful. But they will pick a role model. And hopefully that role model will expose the student to physical education and help them become physically literate in physical education. And then we have the attitudes of the role models. And hopefully the attitudes of the role models are positive because we want them to be positive in the way that they will help their brain grow and be more inclusive. When we look at environment, we have to look at the physical spaces. What type of physical space are we talking about? In physical education, usually it's the gymnasium. But is it at when we work for, or when we have students with physical disabilities, are we giving them one spot, or are they allowed to be in the whole gymnasium? Okay, how much space do you actually give them to play is really important. And then in that environment, what are the attitudes of others? Are they positive? Is everybody welcomed? Are they inclusive? Or are they negative? In the United States, because we are a legalistic society and we find the loopholes to get around it, what happens is our able-bodied students play soccer, for example, and then the students in the wheelchairs, they basically walk around the gym while everybody is playing. And that, in the United States, that is perfectly acceptable. But I'm telling you, it shouldn't be. Because as a physical education teacher, you should be able to integrate those students into the soccer game. And the physical space and the attitudes of others matter in that way of how do we integrate. And then we have the education. And education is formal, what we have learned in the classroom, and then the informal. So this is exposure to people with physical disabilities in the outside world. Do you notice people with physical disabilities? Are they out and about? And what kind of attitudes do you actually hold towards these individuals? And maybe they know that it's negative and so they don't want to be around. So when we look at creating a positive experience for all, we have to give them a good experience that involves the role models, environment, and education. When we look at the role models, what are their attitudes? What kind of attitudes are they holding towards these individuals? Maybe that's why they're not in the field. Students will have positive attitudes if the role model shows positive attitudes. They will mimic their behavior. Furthermore, the environment. The physical space is so important. Give them the space to move about and to become physically literate. Now, I was an adaptive sport athlete in the state of Minnesota. That is where I grew up. And this environment was so positive because I got to play with other students who had physical disabilities. And we had a whole gymnasium to ourselves. And we would play soccer in the fall, floor hockey in the winter, and wiffle ball in the spring. And the attitudes also affected the environment because everybody was so happy. We had coaches, we had parents, we had other people who were involved, and those attitudes were very positive. It also helped the athletes. And then the education, the formal education. What have you learned in your classroom about this population and how they should interact in the physical education space? You might have only received one class, but shouldn't you want to learn more? And then the informal education. Do you watch the Olympics? And if you do, that's great. But my other question for you is, if you watch the Olympics, then do you watch the Paralympics? And if you don't, then why not? Moreover, do you notice people with physical disabilities in your town? Are they out and about? Are they moving? We have a major issue in the United States with obesity. And a part of that population are people with physical disabilities because they have not become physically literate. So what are our solutions? Most people are drawn to physical education, sport, and recreation early because of their positive early experiences as children. And I am no exception. In addition, knowing the importance of role models, environment, and education, and how they play a major role in our attitudes, in our brain health, and our brain growth, and how to actually use those three things to include students with physical disabilities in physical education, recreation, and sport, and further down the line in the field. Moving on to attitudes, research is clear that attitudes are the biggest barrier as to why students with physical disabilities are excluded. And as a teacher, if your attitude is not positive, how do you expect the students to be? In conclusion, what did we discuss? We discussed pre-service teacher preparation, mostly in the United States. We discussed importance of role modeling, environment, and education. And then we discussed solutions. And you might be wondering, where do we go from here? So I want to leave you with two different questions. The first question is, when you were studying in physical education, recreation, or sport, getting your degrees, were there any students with physical disabilities studying next to you? And if there was not, then why weren't they there? We have a major issue of not including this population in the profession. And we must take action and do something about it. Thank you for watching. I hope you all have a great day.